good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that has joined us today from all the beautiful corners of the world, and welcome to the final day of the International Leadership Conference of 2022. My name is Amina Acherkouk, and I am the moderator for this session. I am delighted to introduce the third and final webinar on the journey toward an interconnected world, the Peace Road Initiative. As we all aspire to creating a world that fosters peace and unity across all nations, we recognize the hard distinction being faced with poverty and injustice. This initiative aims to break down these barriers and promote solutions through infrastructure projects such as the Korea-Japan Undersea Tunnel that can provide the bridge towards achieving world peace. The vision requires global collaboration in order to obtain feasibility in establishing the Peace Road for humanity. It is an honor to introduce our commendable panel, Professor Vickerman from the University of Kent in the UK, Mr. Kajikuri, who is the chair of UPF Japan, and Dr. Petrovsky, who is the chief researcher at the Russian-China Center Institute of Far Eastern Studies, who will all enlighten us with their knowledge and distinguished views. These views will be followed by a Q&A session where I will be presenting the questions to the panel for discussion. Please send your questions throughout the session to the email on the screen, so pa@uk.upf.org. It will also be posted in the chat for you. Before I hand over to our first speaker, we will now show a video on the remarkable work that has been carried out for the International Highway, the Japan-Korea Tunnel project that began in 1981.
The International Highway, the Japan-Korea Tunnel project. It looks to connect Japan to the Asian continent by way of an underwater tunnel. Furthermore, it will connect with the other 5 continents of Europe, Africa, North and South America through underwater tunnels and highway systems. Through this, eternal world peace is the ultimate goal. This project was put forward by Reverend Sun Myung Moon when he presented it at the 10th International Conference on the Unity of the Sciences in 1981. In 1982, survey for the Japan-Korea Tunnel project commenced. To begin boring, all possible surveys from land, water, and air proceeded. From 1986, excavation for an inclined shaft for underground survey began in Karatsu City in Saga Prefecture. If they succeed in this project, it would be roughly 4 times the length of the Seikan Tunnel, which is the world's longest underwater tunnel. The main tunnel would total 230 kilometers in length. In order to complete the main tunnel, they first need to dig a pilot tunnel to conduct geological surveys and for the transport of machinery and equipment used for sediment removal. One of these was the inclined shaft in Karatsu City in Saga Prefecture. So, the Japan-Korea Tunnel has many obstacles it must overcome. This project depends on Korea's effort and Japan's effort. Efforts from both sides are required. Key figures from both countries have directly indicated the necessity of the Japan-Korea Tunnel at joint studies. However, what is needed for the Japan-Korea Tunnel to move forward is the consensus of opinions from citizens of both countries. In order to gain consensus from Japanese and Korean citizens, prefectural councils for the Japan-Korea Tunnel have been formed in all 47 prefectures. The plan for the international highway will help realize the most advanced infrastructure. We cannot even estimate the economic benefits this would bring. In November 2013 in Turkey, the Bosphorus underwater tunnel opened connecting Asia and Europe. Now let's all dream of a bullet train that departs from Tokyo to Istanbul and from Istanbul to London. The time has arrived to promote the aim of the linear Chuo Shinkansen from Tokyo to London. It is not a fantasy any longer.
Wow, such an exciting project. It can truly create an abundance of opportunity for the world and allow peace to prevail in all nations. I'm personally really excited by the project and hope it comes to fruition. Now, for our first presentation by Professor Vickerman of the European Economics at the University of Kent, who also holds the role as a chair of the Transport Strategy Centre, Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the Imperial College of London. He has published notable research that has focused on many aspects of transport and the correlation with economic development, regional development, and the integration into the European Union. He has served as an advisor to various parliamentary committees in the UK and as a consultant to European Commission for STEAM projects in enabling connectivity around the world. Today, he will be presenting the international transport infrastructure. Is there a viable way forward? So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Professor Vickerman, to start the session.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Let me just start by sharing my screen so that you can actually see these few slides. Now, what I want to do, as has been pointed out, I'm an economist, and therefore I want to take a sort of realistic appraisal of the viability of this concept. This is nothing to say anything against the laudable aims of the concept, but thinking, what's the best way forward for this? Let's remind ourselves why transport's important in this. It's important because it links people and economic activities. Better transport reduces the cost of those, and that enlarges the markets for goods, for services, and for labor. It enhances productivity of all those places that are connected. It creates nodes in network that have greater connectivity and centrality for transshipment. So ports, rail hubs, road interchanges all become important in this. But within this, borders create barriers. They limit markets. And that was the importance of the single European market, the Schengen area, and so on within the European Union. It was estimated at one stage that crossing some of the borders within Europe, just a few kilometers across, had the equivalent cost of 500 kilometers of travel within countries because of the costs of going through customs procedures and border controls and so on. But viable networks, and that's really ones where the benefits to all the users exceed the costs of creating it, depend on flows. And those flows are still, even within an interconnected Europe, largely national and often monocentral. London, Paris, Madrid all dominate the flows in their respective countries. There are some countries, Germany, China, for example, which depend on a number of large cities interconnected, and which don't quite have this monocentric importance. But that means of bringing everything together in a single hub is very, very important because it limits the interconnectivity that goes on within that. And these flows are rarely international. The last links in the European motorway network, for example, were those that cross borders. If you drive on a long distance route within Europe, you find that the last exit before the next border, even within the Schengen area, the majority of traffic turns off, and that short distance across to the first junction in the next country is relatively quiet. Why big networks? Well, big networks often have a defense or military origin. Think about the roads that the Romans built. They were not essentially for peace, they were for conquering. The US interstate highways that are often held up as an important development of this, were largely developed for defense means, for being able to move military equipment around. The US had looked at the state of what had happened, for example, in Germany in the 1930s with the building of the Autobahn network as being important with that. So we've got to remember that highways often have that military defense contract. And gaps in networks are often about defense. The fact that it took the best part of 200 years to build a fixed link between France and England across the what we call the English Channel and the French call La Manche was for defensive grounds. It was said during the 19th century that they couldn't see why anybody wanted to create something that would interrupt Britain's defensiveness as an island nation. And it was only in the 1950s that that defense argument was finally put to rest. And there are technical barriers as well. Difference in road weight limits, differences in rail track gauges, difference in electrical signaling systems, the need within the trans-European transport networks to focus on what has become known as interoperability, so that you genuinely can take a train right the way across the continent. You can take a truck without having to worry about differences in weight limits and so on. But as I've said, cross-border flows are limited and the economic case becomes problematic. And it may actually change the nature of it. Frontier towns and ports have always had an economic significance because of the border effect that exists there. And the costs and benefits don't always coincide. The transit country problem, countries like Belgium and on a slightly smaller scale, Slovenia, suffer from the fact that they are largely transit in nature. A very high proportion of their infrastructure is dedicated to carrying goods from a country at one side to a country at another side that really has no need to be within the country. And so that is, in a sense, a problem that we've got to recognize and overcome. Now, if we think about the trans-European networks, what were the guidelines? They were designed to address problems both within the EU and its neighboring countries. They had to be projects that were seen to have some European interest. They also needed to have complementary investment in secondary connections. It's no good building a big network if people can't get access to it. So that access to the main network is important. It's all very well to think about the train going from Tokyo to London, but if people can't get on it in intermediate points and get access to it from a very wide range of countries, then it's not going to be viable. A particular emphasis on rail infrastructure, particularly because of course, the importance of rail as less damaging to the climate, because it's environmentally sustainable, and also the need to improve the access of landlocked territories to harbours and to airports. And within that also the idea of this rather curious notion of motorways of the sea, that we should have a system that actually links together all modes of transport. Just sorry, the screen froze at that point. That's sort of what it looks like when we look at one vision of these networks. And of course, the problem is, as you can see from the right-hand side, there are so many different sorts of projects: roads, railways, inland waterways, airports, and so on with that. And that also that they linked out to countries beyond the EU. Identifying key corridors within this, the extent to which you might have a corridor that runs sort of northwest to southeast or southwest to northeast and so on, is seen as important. But it looks a very confused sort of picture in that. Too many networks, duplicating efforts, sending confused signals, a lack of understanding of how the spatial distribution of benefits, maybe counter expectations. Do big cities and central countries benefit? It was supposed to bring in the periphery, but actually the periphery is always going to be relatively peripheral. Distances may shrink, but relative peripherality remains. And so we've got this balance between, on the one hand, a reduction in transport costs, but also the fact that the big markets will still continue to dominate through scale economies. And delivery depends on local policies and finance. Aid is given, may help, but it may encourage excessive investment in new infrastructure and ignore the full life costs. It becomes a burden that some of the poorer countries may have to bear. And do these limitations apply to even grander schemes? So, for example, the development of the global gateway, the EU global gateway, going beyond the TENs to realize a global vision. That's what the vision says, that it will promote worldwide infrastructure investments to create sustainable, smart, resilient, inclusive, and safe networks in all modes of transport. Maybe it shouldn't say in all modes of transport. Maybe it should identify what is the most appropriate mode of transport for solving a particular problem within this. Okay, identifying 300 billion euros until 2027 seems a lot of money, but it doesn't go very far in building the sorts of networks we're talking about. It might provide useful competition in providing links to third countries. Is this a competition between the EU Global Gateway and China's Belt and Road Initiative? Or does it mean just a duplication of effort and resources because nobody really trusts anybody else in terms of what the ultimate motives will be? So let me try and pull this together with some concluding thoughts that might spark off a little bit of discussion later. Is this global gateway just an extension of the TENs and therefore subject to the same constraints and problems? The trans-European networks are good in a basic scheme of looking at things, but have they really achieved some of the grander aims that were set out? Who is gaining and who is losing from these? Are the gains going to those major industrial and commercial centers within the continents rather than generally spreading development across and helping intermediate countries, third countries? And if you put a big link that goes right the way across Europe and Asia and North America, what about Africa? What sort of benefits do they get from it? And it might well be that small input, identify where bottlenecks are that are causing the real cost. Improvements to those bottlenecks might be better value than grand schemes of things. There is, of course, a danger that concentrating effort in particular area. We're seeing this very much where I live at the moment because of problems of capacity across the channel, because of some industrial relations problems within one of the ferry operators, and an excess of traffic and increasing border controls because of Britain's decision to leave the European Union, is causing vast tailbacks of traffic on the roads leading to the port of Dover. It seems to me that the final thing we need to think about is the need to maintain a range of options rather than just a single route. And so it's good to see the fact that these things spread out. A single route is more liable to disruption, and resilience in transport systems is very, very important in terms of thinking about the key to success here. We've seen only too clearly over the last month or so the extent to which disruption to transport through military action can disrupt all sorts of effects. And that is always going to be a concern, whether it's about revolutions in a particular country, whether it's about international conflict, or whether it's about natural disasters that cause problems. So building resilience in transport systems is perhaps the first and most important thing that should be thought of in terms of this. So that's just a few thoughts that I hope will help to guide some of the discussion later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Vickerman, and really great insights. I'm sure we will be unpacking a lot of those thoughts in our Q&A session. I particularly love the sustainability aspect because I think this is high priority at the moment, given the climate change that we have currently throughout the world. So for our next speaker, who is Mr. Kajikuri, the chair of UPF and president of the International Highway Foundation. He's also the advisor of IAPP Japan Forum and has held many leadership positions within organizations such as the Youth Federation of Peace Japan, Association of Ambassadors for Peace Japan, and the president of the Federation for World Peace, where he has promoted peace within various demographics. Today, we have the privilege of seeing the history and current plan of the Japan-Korea Tunnel Project, where Mr. Kajikuri is the president for that foundation. So over to you, Mr. Kajikuri.
Thank you, Chairman. Distinguished leaders of Europe and Middle East, I am Masayoshi Kajikuri, Chair of UPF Japan. On behalf of UPF Japan and the International Highway Foundation, it is my great honor to be able to present the International Highway Project in front of you today. I'd like to talk about current status and challenges of the International Highway and Japan-Korea Tunnel Project for peace and prosperity in Asia. But first, allow me to share the history of the Japan-Korea Tunnel Project. Reverend Sun Myung-moon first announced the project to 800 scholars from more than 100 countries around the world that gathered at the 10th International Conference on the Unity of the Sciences on November 10th, 1981 in Seoul, Korea. Through this ground project, Reverend Moon's aim was build a unified economic zone, a new civilization that unifies the East and the West, and a truly peaceful world. There were to be accomplished by creating an Asian highway that links Japan, the Korean Peninsula, and China, and it would then expand to the rest of the world, where it would develop into an international highway that links to the world's highway system. According to his vision, 8 kilometers on either side of international highway would be a neutral zone, an inviolable area, where no country could interfere, where freedom beyond national borders would be guaranteed. Through an underwater tunnel, this project would connect Japan and Korea, two countries separated by sea. Dr. Eizaburo Nishibori was invited by one of his associates, an American scholar, to participate in this international conference where this ground project was announced. Dr. Nishibori was a famous engineer and researcher who worked for such companies as Toshiba. He met with Reverend Moon at this conference and was deeply inspired after hearing his speech. 2 years later, he appointed his trusted companion, Dr. Yasuo Sasa, as the first president of the Japan-Korea Tunnel Research Institute. Dr. Sasa was leading expert in underwater tunnels and served as a technical advisor in the construction of the Seikan Tunnel, the world's longest undersea tunnel. The Japan-Korea Tunnel Research Institute was established in this way, and it is currently engaged in research activities with former Minister of Justice Taizo Nozawa serving as its first chairman. Prior to the Institute's launch, the International Highway Construction Corporation was established in 1981 to undertake the actual construction operations, and geological and route surveys began soon after. At that time, the agency owned a 6-seater Cessna, the Skyhope, and 3 research vessels, Keiyan Maru, The survey was carried out from land, sea, and air, making full use of these crafts. Based on the vast amount of data collected through these surveys, the Japan-Korea Tunnel Research Institute compiled a report in 1996 for the tunnel project, in which it determined the route and construction method. The starting point of the Japan-Korea Tunnel is said to be Shinzei-machi, Nagoya of Karatsu City in Saga Prefecture. A groundbreaking ceremony to begin the tunnel excavation was held on October 1st, 1986, with scholars, engineers, and other affiliates from Japan and Korea in attendance. After that, there were several interruptions, but construction of the tunnel has proceeded, and currently 540 meters in length have been dug 56 meters below the surface. The plan is to drill another 1,000 meters, connect it to an advanced shaft, and then to drill a working shaft and main shaft. In response to Reverend Moon's proposal in 1981, the Chinese government took great interest in the project. In response to Reverend Moon's proposal in 1981, the Chinese government took great interest in the project and approached the International Highway Construction Corporation. At the invitation of the Chinese government, Mr. Gentaro Kajikuri, then chairman of the International Highway Construction Corporation, met with then Vice President of China, Mr. Wan Chen. Mr. Wan echoed the idea of an international highway and immediately responded to possible difficulties in convincing North Korea by saying, that will be my responsibility. In addition to promoting international highway and Japan-Korea Tunnel project, Reverend Moon proposed the Bering Strait Tunnel project in 2005 at the founding of the Universal Peace Federation. This is also a grand initiative that looks to connect the Bering Strait between Alaska in the United States, another symbol of the division of East and West, and Siberia in Russia. They will be connected with tunnels and bridges and to the rest of the world through the International Highway and Japan-Korea Tunnel, which will help create a single community. At the opening plenary of World Summit Africa 2018, held in Dakar, Senegal, Dr. Hak Jahan, the wife of Reverend Son Myung Moon, said, "Therefore, I am advocating a peace highway which will travel from the south of Africa, from the Cape of Good Hope, through Africa, Europe, Eurasia, and Asia, connecting all the way to Korea." In this way, the Japan-Korea Tunnel has been proposed and referred to not only in Japan, but also internationally. However, I believe that there are three issues that need to be overcome in making this tunnel a reality. First, an agreement between the governments of Japan and South Korea, as well as gaining understanding and public opinion of Japanese and Korean people, which will form the basis for this agreement, will be required. Understanding from the US, other countries, and the international community will also be necessary. Second, the project must prove that it can be a sustainable business. And third, technical issues need to be overcome. Although research has proved excavation is possible, further investigation is required in order to determine other construction technologies and timeframes. As I just mentioned, the first challenge is to reach an agreement between the two governments. In order to do so, public opinion must first be formed in Japan to propel lawmakers to make the Japan-Korea Tunnel into a national project. With that goal in mind, councils were formed in all 47 prefectures to promote the Japan-Korea Tunnel. And based on this foundation, a movement was launched to make this into a national council. Currently, the prefectural and national councils are working to reach an intergovernmental agreement within this decade. That's all I have to share. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kajikuri, for that wonderful presentation that I think really highlights the need for great collaboration to make this project a reality. I particularly enjoyed the summary you presented of this huge vision of transport networks throughout the world that I believe can really draw humankind into a peaceful development of trade, ideas, and mutual understanding. Thanks so much. All right, so now for our third and final speaker, who is Dr. Petrovsky, Chief Researcher at the Russian-China Center Institute of Far Eastern Studies. He has gained his doctorate in political science and has maintained membership in the Russian Academy of Military Science. He's also a senior counselor at the Asian Economic Cooperation Foundation. Also, one of his notable achievements is he's a renowned author of a list of books and articles on a variety of topics such as the international peacekeeping and conflict resolution, human security, and human development issues. I'll hand over to you, Dr. Petrovsky, for your view on the Peace Road Initiative.
Dear colleagues, welcome you all. Good day. And I'm really happy to join this very interesting discussion on the key elements of the International Peace Highway project proposed by the founding father in 1981. I would like to concentrate on such a key component of this initiative as a Bering Strait tunnel, undersea tunnel project, which was proposed again by the founding father on September 12th, the year 2005, at the inaugural session of the Universal Peace Federation. I was there, I was one of the participants, and I still remember this great and inspiring day when I first heard about this initiative. Since then, some years passed, and now we'll have an opportunity to assess what kind of project was achieved in view of this particular Bering Strait tunnel project. So I would like to concentrate on two aspects of this. First, which is the view on the Russian side, I mean the feasibility of the project and the discussion which we have had in Russia, in academic circle and in public circle, and in the government about this project. And I would like to offer some considerations on the more general context about what's going on in a wider perspective relative to Bering Strait Tunnel, Peace King Tunnel project. So as you know, the idea was discussed. The idea of this bridge or underwater railway, undersea tunnel or whatever, the idea was discussed since 19th century, both in Russia and in the United States. And it was discussed as a kind of symbolic initiative which could link together two continents and bring peace between Russia and America. And since the initiative was proposed by for the founding father, we have started to discuss it in more detail. And the idea is now we have a series of consideration on the Russian side, which complicates a little bit the implementation of this idea. First, I would mention, as you know, that the climate is very severe there, and natural conditions are not very good for building this type of underwater sea tunnel it's a kind of extreme engineering. What I mean is this type of construction is technically possible, but very difficult. Then I think that this idea should be part of the Russian national transportation strategy. As you know, there was a kind of strategy like this, and it provided the building of a railway which would connect the region of Yakutia, it's one of the Russian polar region of Siberia, to the north, to Chukotka. It's a kind of railway link which would go to the proposed Bering Strait Tunnel project. So this project was put into the Russian transportation strategy, but then it was suspended. Because as of now, it's not a priority for the Russian authorities. Now they would like to concentrate on modernizing Baikal-Amur railway and Trans-Siberian railway to make them fit to transport cargo from China to Europe, container cargo, and and also to export Russian coal to China. So at present, this is priority for the Russian transportation authorities because it has very solid economic motivation, dealing with export, etc., etc. But the idea still exists. So the point is, if this underwater sea tunnel could be built, what it could bring to the Russian economy. Because the point is, there is a need to develop all these vast regions of northeastern Siberia, including Chukotka region. So, what this proposed undersea tunnel, what it could bring to the Russian economy? What would be the profit? So the Russian experts still discussing this issue, and I would also say that there are some environmental concerns, and sometimes they bring very sudden results. I would give you just one example. You know that this area and the Bering Strait, it's part of the Arctic region, and the nature of the Arctic is very fragile. And there are some concerns on the side of the Russian indigenous people who live in Chukotka that the proposed tunnel, this tunnel bridge could bring some damage to environment. And sometimes there are some really strange stories. I would give you just one example. For example, just recently, the regional parliament of Chukotka region made a statement to condemn the Worldwide Foundation. The authorities of Chukotka, the regional parliament of Chukotka, accused the WWF of trying to impose the so-called 20-mile buffer zone along the entire Arctic coast of Russia, which was unacceptable, as this parliament said in their statement. But the point is that the parliamentarians who represent, again, they represent indigenous people, but they were confused because they confused this 20-mile buffer zone along the entire Arctic coast with the protection zone, which is to be set along the coast of the national reserve, which is called Beringia, which is also on the seashore of Bering Strait. So they were confused, and they accused WWF of the so-called international interference in the Russian affairs, and etc., etc. But the point is that that was WWF Russia who signed a special agreement with the Russian Ministry of Natural Resources to build this protective zone in accordance with the Russian law. That's just an example of things which could very suddenly happen. So we need to consider very seriously incentives, economic incentives on the Russian side, then some environmental concerns, and then By the way, I would like to bring a wider context. You know, the Bering Strait is part of the Northern Sea route, and Russia has certain place to develop the Northern Sea route, and many Asian countries, including China and Republic of Korea and Japan, they also would like to utilize Northern Sea route to bring their, their goods to Europe, which could save time not to use the other sea routes, southern sea routes. So the point is, we have to consider seriously in terms of economic efficiency and cost efficiency, what would be more efficient for the transporters to use the sea lines or to use this proposed underwater sea tunnel. That's a big question, because in the that in the rest of the world, those who operate land transportation routes, they compete with the sea transportation companies in the whole world. Then I would say that originally the founding father proposed this international peace highway as a road which could bring together China, Japan, and Korea. But now we see that, for example, China, which is implementing their own Belt and Road initiative, they have succeeded in building many land line routes and sea routes, and the question is, shall they compete with the proposed project of the Bering Strait project, or could complement them? And by the way, China has certain experience and really good experience of building undersea tunnels. For example, the longest undersea tunnel in the world was built and it connected the two ports, the east and west parts of Tsingtao Peninsula, that's the Yellow Sea. Now the Chinese, they built the 122-kilometer long tunnel under the Bohai Strait. So we have some successful project implemented already. And I would just note that at the World Expo Year 2010 in Shanghai, the idea of the Bering Strait Tunnel won the Grand Prix award as the very best innovative project. So what I'm going to see that we need to consider wider context for this initiative, and we have to consider very seriously cost and cost efficiency. And last, I'm going to just to mention, that's not the topic for our discussion, but now we have very difficult situation, between Russia and other Western countries because of the, this military operation in Ukraine. So in this particular situation, it's very difficult to discuss any practical issues of how to go on with the Bering Strait project. We need some time for this big international crisis to be settled. But then after this, I'm sure that this will happen sooner or later, and I hope it will happen rather soon. And then we should consider what to do next, because as our other speakers mentioned several times, we need to move forward in terms of raising public awareness, and we have to do the next step. I just would like to make reference to the article by Michael Mickler, who wrote in this regard that as soon as we discuss this project, it looks like the supporters of this project talk to other supporters, and the visionaries sometimes talk to other visionaries. But the next step will be for us to deal with the governments, with some private businesses, to make them really motivated. And again, I support the idea that as soon as it deals with such kind of large-scale infrastructure projects, of course, we need a kind of inter-government agreement to do this. And again, I hope time will come, maybe rather soon, to do this for the Bering Strait undersea tunnel project. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Petrovsky, for your valuable insight. I think actually it is quite important to recognize that government priorities are predominantly motivated by economic gain, and it's particularly challenging to show those short-term benefits for projects like this that have such, substantial amount of capital investment required. But I think if we can just show, the cost benefit analysis in the long term, governments might actually want to carry out these projects. So yeah, thank you again. Now, before we start the Q&A session, I just want to remind everyone to just look at the chat and send all of your questions to pa@uk.upf.org, because this is your opportunity to pose questions to the panel in this Q&A session. So before we begin, I just wanted to let you all know that, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a tab that says interpretation. Mr. Kajikuri will be responding in Japanese. So for all of the English native speakers, please choose English. And for all of the Japanese native speakers, please choose Japanese, so you can understand the whole discussion as it is transcribed. Okay, so now we will begin the Q&A session for the Journey Towards an Interconnected World, the Peace Road Initiative. So I'd like to ask all the panel to join me. I've got a few questions already prepared. The first question is for you, Professor Vickerman. So what benefits from the Channel Tunnel was most significant to the UK and or the European Union? How do you think developing an extensive highway network as well as a rail could be compliant with our climate change obligations? And are there any innovative measures to include renewable energy with road or rail infrastructure? So over to you.
Yes, that's a quite comprehensive set of questions, isn't it?
It is, yes.
I think one of the interesting things about all of these big projects, and the Channel Tunnel is no exception, is that the expected benefits in advance of the project are always greater than the ones that can actually be identified after the event. So there is always a sort of optimism bias in promoters' views that the costs will be lower and that the traffic levels, the benefits will be higher. And that is certainly the case in the case of the Channel Tunnel. It's also, of course, interesting that the case there is, which we're talking about a much shorter distance. Channel Tunnel system is only 50 kilometers in length compared with some of these very long tunnels. But that it is also in competition with ferries. And so there is a variety of options that are available to people in that. But the really important thing is that it is a rail connection. You can't drive through it. You can only take road vehicles on shuttle trains through it. And that does give a bias towards rail. And I think that that is very important in terms of thinking of the environmental benefits of rail, particularly electrified rail, which is more likely to be able to be powered by renewable energy. And so I think that is very important. And if I can just sort of pick up on one other issue, which was highlighted by Dr. Petrovsky in this, is not to forget long distance shipping in this, that maritime transport is cheaper and it is more flexible than other means, because ships can go to many different ports and therefore they can reflect changes in the pattern of flows. And I think although there have been problems with shipping recently, we saw the economic impact of a large container ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal only last year. And that is something that I think that has been very important in identifying the need for a variety of different things, and not to put all the English saying goes, all our eggs in one basket in terms of this, because there is a delight in the, as the French would say, of the grand projet. Yes, they capture the imagination, whether it's a Channel Tunnel, whether it's the Japan-Korea Tunnel, whether it's the Bering Tunnel. Yes, they capture the imagination as grand projet. But I think we've got to remember that these are not what actually makes the economy work. What makes the economy work is actually good local transport, with the option then of linking more widely. And getting that balance right is a very, very difficult thing. And I think we mustn't forget that in all of these. But just coming back to the original question, what are the benefits to the UK of the Channel Tunnel, has been that it has increased the capacity to be able to get across the tunnel, to get across the channel. But that, of course, has been hijacked by the fact that Britain then left the European Union, which has had brought a hiatus in its trade relationships with its major trading partners. And so we don't really now know what the long-term effects of that are going to be, because it's, again, been hijacked by much wider political affairs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, that is the number one question for everyone. What is that impact of Brexit? Thank you for that. I think my question to you, like just a follow-up question. So we know that there are great benefits of the transport via electric rail, but is there anything that's any innovative solution that you've seen in terms of shipping? Is there anything that you can share with us today?
Well, much the same thing. I mean, shipping is not notoriously clean in terms of its effects, but it can be clean, and so that changes in the way that ships are powered is possible, whether we're talking about harnessing some form of electric power, or more likely something like hydrogen power may well be a way forward in that, which is much cleaner. The problem with shipping, of course, is that it does create problems in ports, but it also is adding to global emissions. And getting, again, it's about the balance with that, but it may well be that the environmental impact of big construction projects, which is something that we often forget about, you know, what is the environmental effect of all that concrete? What is the environmental effect of producing all that steel? Those are things that we've got to remember as well in terms of this. There may be some long-term benefits, but at the moment when the world is in this very, very delicate position, we've got to think very carefully about what is the best way to harness power. It's not, that sounds very sort of narrow-minded and short-sighted in this, but I think we've got to maintain that balance in terms of what we need to do in the short term and what we can do in the short term against some of these grand visions for the long-term future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of governments around the world are trying to achieve that net zero objective for climate change. So I don't know if you would like to add anything, Dr. Petrovsky or Mr. Kajikuri, or this is a discussion, so I'm happy for you to add any points as well.
If I may, I would like to add just a few words to what Professor Vickerman had just said. Indeed, there is always a kind of a very strong alternative to the proposed undersea tunnel, highways, or railways. Even if to take the underwater sea tunnel, which is to link Japan and Korea, there's very strong alternative. There is the high-speed ferry boat line which connects Busan and Fukuoka. That's very good. I had a chance to take it once. It's very fast, very convenient, at least for tourists, for the passengers. And the same goes for cargo transportation lines. So we need to think twice about the cost efficiency. It's just another example of how it works. And then to take, for example, again, this particular project, which was discussed by our esteemed Japanese speaker. We have some other projects in Russia, for example, how to link the Russian coast of the Far East with the Sakhalin Island. Again, we're keeping in mind another underwater sea tunnel, which could be a combination of railway and highway, undersea railway and highway. And there is the idea of how to link Sakhalin and Hokkaido, again, with this underwater sea tunnel. And the question is, are they to complement the idea which we discussed, or their competitors? Some American experts like Mike Nicholas say, okay, these are competitors, but we have to see the wider picture and to discuss it like to give a wider framework for all things which you discuss right now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the fact that, it has worked in other countries, why can't we, use the same examples and have those connective infrastructure around the world? Like, this is really something that, you can pose to governments. And if they do kind of push back, you have these wonderful examples to say, well, actually, it does work. We just need to have, the investment for the long-term benefits. All right.
Could I just come?
Yeah, of course.
Can I just come back on that point? I mean, one of the interesting things to think about this is going back to the idea of the density of flows. If you think about the Channel Tunnel, it sits within a group of very major cities: London, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, where the greatest distance is of the order of 500 kilometers, something like that. And so there is already a density of flows, but even in that area, it's actually quite difficult when those flows are cross-border to make for something that is ultimately profitable. When you're talking about, and I'm thinking particularly, for example, of the Bering Straits here, it is relatively remote, as Dr. Petrovsky has said, and therefore the linking infrastructure, and you don't have these big centers of population, these big centers of economic, actually to make it work. So the big projects that work better, I'm thinking, for example, of the Øresund link between Copenhagen and Malmo, links two major cities. If you think about the links across the Bosporus, which are linking major centers of population in the greater Istanbul area, that's important. Even the Japan-Korea tunnel is linking slightly more peripheral parts of the country. It's not a direct link, as it were, between Tokyo and Seoul. It's a longer way round, and actually making those things then economically viable is much, much more difficult in those circumstances. And that's where I think we have to weigh up this balance between the grand projet and the smaller scale things which can really ease bottlenecks.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think we can move on to the next question, which I will pose to you, Mr. Kajikuri. Japan has explored steadily the tunnel project over the last 40 years. Can you offer any advice to other nations on pursuing the Peace Road initiative? How could the existing projects such as One Belt, One Road, or the EU project for transportation networks incorporate the Peace Road vision as proposed by Father Moon in 1981?
Thank you very much. Professor Vickerman, Dr. Petrovsky, I learned very much from your presentations. Thank you very much. Regarding the question you just asked, as you all know, just like the United Kingdom, Japan is an island country, and it is not connected to any country by land. So this Japan-Korea tunnel will be the first connection to connect with another country. So as we try to expand this project, we really want to learn from the Euro tunnel, and we have really studied this case deeply how UK and France connected. I think it's an extremely historical achievement. So the Eurotunnel, and also when we think about the road network all throughout Europe, Europe is Europe also already has this network, this transportation network all over Europe. So this is an example for us to follow, because Japan does not have any of this. So this is something that we really need to do between Japan and Korea and try to overcome all the past historical problems. So this past 40 years, what we have learned, I would like to share some of this. When two countries, no matter how much we want to make this work, we really need the support of the people of the countries. This is what we have really felt strongly this past 40 years. So as I introduced in my presentation, we have made these councils that can promote this Japan Tunnel project. We have made councils in all prefectures of Japan so that the people can understand what the Japan Tunnel project is about and what it can bring to Japan and the world. So by doing these kind of projects and movements, we are trying to get the people of Japan to understand how the Japan Tunnel will bring a good future to Japan. And this has brought and through receiving the support of the people, we have been able to create a proposal towards the government. So we cannot just hope the government will solve it or hope the government will gain interest, but we really have to make an environment that the people actually support. So we have tried to make this project come true by making it a project that the people of the country really support and really want to achieve. This is one of the main projects, or one of the results that Japan has been able to bring during these past 40 years. And one of the points that Reverend Moon wanted to bring through this Peace Road Tunnel, this international highway project, was the bring an equal economy throughout the world. So if the government can understand this, how to make this environment to bring more of an equal environment, equal economic environment, I think that it would be very good. This is what we have been trying to do for the past 40 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kajikuri. And yes, I think there is a lot to learn. I want to ask a follow-up question to you, Professor Vickerman. From your experience, what learnings could you share with Mr. Kajikuri on the projects that you've worked on so that this tunnel between Japan and Korea is a success?
Yes, I think Mr. Kajikuri made a very, very important point there, which is about getting the backing and the will of the people who will be affected by these projects. And one of the difficulties with this is the people who are most affected, those who live in the areas close to where the construction takes place and where the increased traffic will pass through, are generally not the people who benefit the most from it. Dr. Petrovsky mentioned about indigenous people in northern Siberia as well. These are the people who, as it were, who it's like the transit country effect, you know, that you'll bear the cost of the project, but you don't get the benefits. And actually an initiative is very important to show people how they can benefit from this. And that was certainly in terms of the Channel Tunnel, it was very important. There was relatively little local support, certainly in the UK, for this. It was seen generally as it would act as a sort of drain that would suck economic activity out of the UK towards France. I mean, I think that was wrong. On the other hand, they thought it as being something that would lead to the entire concreting of the entire county of Kent, which lies between London and the coast. So having neutral people, not the promoters of the project, but having neutral and respected people who can make a balanced view of it, I think is something that is terribly important in terms of that. The other danger is where it's seen as being something that is dealt with at a national level or a binational level. That is also something that then tends to go against go against the sort of natural belief of people. They see it as something's been imposed on them. Now, this is something that the governments of France and Britain wanted to do, and it was having a negative effect on them because they would have to bear the cost of it. And I think that that is something that you see in lots of projects around the world. The counter to that is where individual regions see that this is an opportunity for them to put themselves on the map and to grab available money that might be available. For example, in the EU systems, there wasn't much money available, but it was a way of bringing money in. Politicians like to show that they have done things that have benefited people, and to a large extent that's often seen in these big vanity projects, if you like, are things that politicians like from that. So you've got to guard against that and make sure that you're making a balanced view to show people how they as individuals, if not benefit from it, at least will not suffer from it. And that's a very difficult balancing act.
Yeah, I particularly like that last point. Not they don't benefit, but at least just show that there is no negative impact as well.
Or if there is a negative impact, that they'll get some compensation for it. That's the other side of it.
That's the other side, exactly. All right, is there any other additional comments before we move on to the next question for Dr. Petrovsky? No? Okay, so I'll move on to the next question. There have been quite a number of proposals for the Bering crossing in history. What do you think was the main impediment to its progress? This is for you, Dr. Petrovsky.
Well, thank you for this really good question. I think the biggest problem and the most serious consideration dealing with this particular project have relation to national security concerns. It may sound strange, but the very idea of this underwater sea tunnel or bridge was to be used, for example, by Joseph Stalin right after the Second World War, and he wanted really to build this facility to bring Russian troops to Alaska, to have to wage a war with America. And just recently, we have had the whole series of concerns relative to Russia and some other Asian countries. Just an example. In 1990, Russia and the Soviet Union then and the United States, they signed special agreement of how to delimitate the fishery zones, which come very close to Australia. It's these big sea areas, open sea areas to the northwest of the Bering Strait, if I'm not mistaken. And the result of this agreement is that about 75% of all this area came to the United States and only 25% to the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union signed this agreement but did not ratify it. So it was not put into effect. And just now there is a discussion in the Russian parliament and the State Duma of how to cancel this agreement at all. Now Russia proposes to, to have limitation 50-50. To make it more fair to Russia. That's just one example. And another example, I will put just one more example. As a Chinese scholar, I know for sure that some of my friends, Chinese experts, they consider very seriously of how China could use the Northern Sea route to bring the Chinese goods to the Western Europe, and they're afraid that the United States could use their role and their position in the Bering Strait to block this communication. Some Chinese experts even call the Bering Strait, they call it the Bering Gate, which could be closed at a certain day to block communication. It might sound strange, but Chinese take it seriously. And one more example, the US Navy, they have a special program which is called Freedom of Navigation, which means that the US Navy send their naval ships to some areas which are disputed, areas with the disputed territories, whether it be some sea territories or land territories, just to demonstrate, to show the US flag, to show that the freedom of navigation should be honored. For example, the United States do it on a regular basis in southern China Sea. And the situation is very difficult there because there is a whole set of disputed areas between China and other ASEAN countries. And as soon as the US naval ships come close to China's border, it causes very, very bad reaction on the Chinese side. But now I learned that the US Navy, they would like to continue this program. They call it FON, Freedom of Navigation, along the Northern Sea route, quite close to Bering Strait. The United States just want to show that the Northern Sea route is a kind of open international waters, and just like to demonstrate, again, they demonstrate their flag. And that may cause some conflict because the United States mention all the time the convention, how would they call it? The United Nations Convention on the Sea. And again, it says that the Northern Sea route is the kind of open waters. But as soon as any country has open shore, just adjacent to these waters, this particular state could regulate the passage of ships, whether it be cargo or naval ships, by its own national legislation, which Russia tries to do. And this is another point of possible conflict. Yeah. Just to mention that the situation is very difficult in this particular area and relative to this particular project.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Petrovsky. And I think that leads into this next question quite beautifully. So with these conflicts that you've just mentioned, what do you think is the most important or most relevant point of Peace Road Initiative to these current world situations? And this is, for everyone to also contribute.
Well, I think the readiness of Russia and the United States to start talking about it on serious basis would be a very good sign for all sides, and it would be kind of symbolic thing to show that the current confrontation between Russia and the United States and other Western countries would be settled somehow. But again, it's very difficult because now we see the whole combination of issues and concerns both on the Russian side and even on the Chinese side. Yeah. And we have to consider it very seriously. And if to really talk about the Bering Strait Tunnel project as something which is to be implemented, it should be a kind of package deal to consider all these national security, environmental, economic, and other concerns.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very important.
Could I perhaps just come in on that? Because I mean, it's interesting to note that the long history of the Channel Tunnel was about long-term mutual suspicion between Britain and France, particularly on the British side, in terms of this, even to the extent that one of the proposed tunnels of the late 19th century suggested that the trains that came out should go up a sort of corkscrew, so that there could be shore batteries that if there was an invading army that decided to come through the tunnel, it could be fired upon. I mean, ridiculous it seems in the present age. But what is interesting, we would like to think that these projects could come about because there is mutual trust between the leaders of the relevant countries. And that's something that we see in very short supply at the moment. In the Channel Tunnel case, it wasn't so much mutual trust between Margaret Thatcher and François Mitterrand, who were poles apart in terms of their political views, but it was that each of them saw an opportunism that fitted with their own narrative. In Mitterrand's case, it was a grand projet, achieving something that Napoleon had set out to do and never achieved. In Thatcher's case, this was something that could be funded by the private sector, and it would show the dominance of that sort of free market private sector conservatism that she espoused. The two things came from opposite ends into the same project, and they just agreed on it at that time. It was a small window of opportunity. So one has to grab these small windows of opportunity in order to try and sort of see that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the leaders of the relevant nations have got to be best friends or on the same political sheet.
Yeah.
They just have to see that there are advantages in it for each of them. And of course, dividing up sea areas, particularly when it comes to questions of fish, is something that we've all been very frustrated about in terms of the Brexit effect of this, which is a nonsense in terms of the overall significance of that in terms of our economic relationships. But it is such an important political point that is very, very difficult to overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for those great insights. I'm conscious of time, but I do want to get through at least two of these questions from the audience. So this one's another one for you, Dr. Petrovsky, from Walter Morif from Newcastle. He's asked, given the remoteness of the eastern tip of Siberia, how long might it take to build the needed rail and road over the thousands of kilometers not yet developed in the countryside? Do you have any insight?
It's another good question. I mean, it's a real problem for Russia, because if to take seriously how to connect the proposed Bering Strait tunnel with the rest of the Russian regions, it's quite a problem, because it's several thousand miles, and most of which are permafrost. It comes from Yakutia, Russia's northeast Siberia, and the weather conditions and the climate is very severe there. So it's a real problem how to build a kind of railway. And another problem is, again, economic one. What would be the incentives for the Russian economy, for the Russian government to do that? Right now, there is no big incentive, because it's more attractive for Russia, again, to modernize the Trans-Siberia Railway, to Baikal-Amur Railway, because for some very serious practical needs of how to transport coal, Russian coal, to China, to the northeast of China, and how to load the Trans-Siberia Railroad with the Chinese container trains. And so all resources which Russia has, I mean, the Russian transportation authorities, they concentrated right now, they're concentrated on that. And even now, it's not enough resources to completely modernize the Trans-Siberia Railway or to completely modernize the Baikal-Amur Railway, as Russia wants. So the practical situation is like this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess it's all kind of assumptions. Well, there is another question that maybe you can contribute to as well for the whole panel, actually. Is there a parallel project anywhere in the world where we can see results to gauge the results that we need? And this is from Nick Bacau. Is there any, so this is, I guess, like a follow-up from that question, Dr. Petrovsky.
Yes, again, if again I could mention the case of China, they have had the two longest underwater sea tunnels in the world. Mm-hmm. One of them is in operation already. One is to be completed soon. Both of them they were built under the, the yellow Chinese Yellow Sea of China.
Yeah.
but they were done to serve the needs of the Chinese economy only.
Yeah.
So the particular need was how to connect the two of the biggest seaports on the Yellow Sea in China. And now it's much more easier to do that. But there was a big economic incentive, and this particular project serves in a perfect way to these particular needs. That's the only example which I could put forward right now.
Thank you.
In terms of projects which were completed already.
Thank you.
I think that's a very important point, that they are within a single country, and therefore you can see the creation of the economic mass that's important from that. Whereas with international projects, it's very, very difficult. I mean, there are relatively few of them to start with.
Yeah.
There's the Channel Tunnel, there's the Öresund crossing, there's the proposed Straits of Gibraltar link, but that is still only a proposal. It's very difficult to find other major projects. There are one or two not cross sea, but for example, the Alpine base tunnels, for example, linking Northern Europe with Italy through the Alps, but there are relatively few other projects that are international in nature that one can really, say, yeah, that gives an example. And that's the difficulty. Each of these projects is so unique, so individual, that it's very, very difficult to learn precise lessons about what the impact will be.
Yeah, exactly. I think that that definitely gives some insight. I just wanted to close this Q&A session with any remarks from you, Mr. Kajikuri, especially on that example with the China project that you might want to add.
Thank you very much. The undersea tunnels in China and other infrastructure, for them to have even more value in the world, for example, the liberation of North Korea and the realization of the Japan-Korea tunnel, the infrastructure that China has would actually be able to become more effective if you can really connect to the world. And there's not so much time, so I don't want to speak long, but if we can really realize this great economic realm in this East Asia, I hope that this infrastructure in China can be really used, and we really need a vision that can connect all of Asia as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kajikuri, and thank you to Professor Vickerman and Dr. Petrovsky for this very insightful panel discussion. I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done, but with your thought leadership, I think we can get there. I just want to say thank you for everyone listening and sending through those questions to the panel. Universal Peace Federation will be having more webinars in due course on the Peace Road Initiative, and there is a plan to actually develop a think tank on this initiative, so as to support its implementation in the way that benefits all of humanity. Okay, so I'd like to first just say thank you to all the staff who made this event happen, and the panelists for your great presentations and just great discussion. I've personally learned quite a lot about all the projects that are happening in these different demographic markets. So Victor will now put us all on the screen for a quick group photo. So we'll just see everything, and then we'll move on to, I will hand over to Mr. Jacques Marion for closing remarks. So I don't know, Victor, if you're going to put us all on the screen. Yep, so everyone there. Okay, smile, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. All right. So I will hand over to Mr. Jacques Marion for our closing remarks and to close this International Leadership Conference of 2022.
Thank you, Amina, and thank you, Dr. Vickerman, Dr. Petrovsky. Thank you, Mr. Kajikuri, for your enlightening and very stimulating discussion on the Peace Road Initiative. We can feel truly that this is an idea whose time has come, and that despite the challenge, the real challenge you mentioned that we can see ahead, of course, it's still very much worth pursuing. And if we want to especially overcome the legacy of conflict of our previous centuries, I think this is a very important project. Now we come to the conclusion of our International Leadership Conference on the theme Contemporary Challenges to the World Order, the Search for Solutions. It's been significant for us, UPF Europe and Middle East, to co-organize this ILC with UPF Japan. We are grateful that Japan is playing a leading role in developing our peace-building projects throughout the world, as you could see with this particular project of the Korea-Japan Tunnel. We held 3 webinars together. In the first one yesterday, the panel addressed the prospects for South Korea's future President Yoon's administration to contribute to peace and security in Northeast Asia. They assessed the support that he enjoys in a country still divided among regional and generational lines, as well as the potential implications of his plan to strengthen South Korea's alliance with the United States and Japan. In the second webinar yesterday, former UN diplomats and religious leaders discussed how to empower the UN, United Nations, so that it could better fulfill its peace mission. The discussion centered around the UPF founders' proposal to introduce a moral and ethical dimension into the UN decision-making process through an interreligious council composed of leaders from the fields of education, culture, and religion, who could complement the role of the Security Council in the UN by recommending going beyond narrow national interests. In the third webinar today, our distinguished panelists discussed very interestingly the Peace Road Initiative aiming at connecting nations, facilitating the free flow of goods and people for the sake of peace in line with the UN SDG calling for regional and transborder infrastructure to support economic development and human well-being. Indeed, this ILC aims at addressing the current situation of conflict in the world by pointing to solutions for sustainable peace. Since 2 years now, UPF has been focusing on the year 2022 in regards to peace in Northeast Asia. We initiated what we call the Think Tank 2022 project, which brings together experts from around the world to share insights as to how the peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula could be accomplished in the coming years. Last February, UPF convened a World Summit on the theme of peace on the Korean Peninsula, inviting many world leaders, including heads of state and former heads of state from major nations who expressed their support for ending the division of Korea. Yet, 1 week after the summit, Russian troops invaded Ukraine, and the whole world is now mobilized to prevent a confrontation on a higher scale. Indeed, the conflicts in Eastern Europe and Northeast Asia are connected, involving the same superpowers pushing for national supremacy. And in parallel to the war in Ukraine, the tension is now rising again around the Korean Peninsula. This re-emergence of conflicts from the 20th century indicates that the challenges to the current world order need to be solved on a deeper level, with a vision that transcends national borders, religious exclusivism, and right-wing or left-wing ideologies. And this is where the role of UPF comes into focus with its philosophy based on interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. The conflict of values is one fundamental reason of the war between Russia and the West, today centering on Ukraine. It is also at the heart of the division of the Korean Peninsula. This question is often overlooked, however, when we talk about overcoming conflicts. Yet, however important economic development projects or political agreements may be in fostering peace and reconciliation, they cannot alone replace the sharing of common fundamental values to secure sustainable peace. This underlines the discussions we've just had on the Interreligious Council at the UN or the Peace Road Initiative, where we see the need for spiritual leaders to be involved in order for the UN to function effectively or for the Highway for Peace to succeed in bridging nations, regions, and cultures. Maybe the tragedy of the war erupting on such an overwhelming scale in 2022 can be a warning call that Europe and the world need to start looking more deeply at a new perspective of universal values. Thank you very much, and I wish you a great time and hopefully see you again in other conferences. Thank you very much.